Okay, so here we are. This is about unlearning, deconstructing, innovating. Usually this is associated with younger people, business people, and people outside large institutions. So when my students, who is here, Sophia, invited not only a teacher, but also someone who spent her entire life in the machin, as de Gaulle called it, the United Nations system, you will admit there is a paradox. I'm not the immediate candidate you could think of for innovation, deconstructing, and unlearning, right? Well, so it's going to be my impossible task today to demonstrate to you the opposite. Okay, what has been my job all my life for the last 32 years? Wow, building peace in the minds of men and women. This is the motto and the constitution of UNESCO. It's quite a wide program, wouldn't you say? But also quite a relevant one. One, because peace, as we could see from the South-North Korean element, is still a common good that is far from achieved in many parts of the world, and we see that every day. War and intolerance seems to be spreading. And two, because building peace in the minds of men and women at UNESCO means doing it through education, culture, science, and communication. Not money, not infrastructure, not big guns, not even the internet. So this is what I'm trying to tell you here, is keep faith in some of the institutions. If the institutions you have for governance do not satisfy you, then innovate and build different ones. The Urban Biosphere. The motto of this project, which was a UN project, was reconnecting people through and to their natural environment. We have seen just before a perfect example of what it is to reconnect to your natural environment through urban agriculture. But don't you think there is also a need to reconnect people to each other today, in this day where we're building walls as opposed to bridges, where we're trying to say that foreigners, that women should be excluded for some public places, that migrants are undesirable people? There is a need for reconnection. And why do that in the city? Okay. The world is moving to town. More than 50% of the world today lives in cities, and by 2100 it would be 90%. So the city is our playground. And the days where at the UN we were talking about stemming the rural exodus are gone. We all know that we are Homo urbanicus, the urban creature. Why cities? Because cities today are if you pitch cities against the environment, you say cities produce 70% of the carbon emission of the world. Cities pollute, the air is unbreathable as we speak of today in Beijing or Delhi. So cities pollute, cities produce CO2, and also cities produce waste that has to go somewhere else, right? So there is a huge what we call the ecological footprint of cities today. We now say, with this new cool tool called the ecological footprint, that if all of us lived and consumed and produced waste like New Yorkers, we would need 7 planets. And we don't have 7 planets. Even for those of you who think that we've just discovered 9 new planets, I think the time by which we can all go and happily live together there is a bit far. Okay? So why cities also? Because cities are places of innovation, urban agriculture, green roofs, common gardens, and the city is also the place of reconnection between people. People of different classes, people of different colors, people of different genders, mixed together, just in the subway. In New York subway, you see people from countries who are at war with each other, Serbs and Bosniaks and Arabs and Jews, and they all go happily together in the subway. They go to work, they talk to each other. So cities are places of reconnection. And don't forget that the polis, was invented in Athens in 200 or so BC, in order to create politics, create politics and institution. And this is what we are talking about today. The need to reintroduce politics in all of this. Ecosystem services and biodiversity in unlikely places. This is my contribution to the unlearning and deconstructing part of this talk. Okay. Do you really think there is thriving nature on the roof of Chicago City Hall? Well, yes, there is. Why? Because most of the cities do not use pesticides, for example, for their garden. So the bees on the roof of Chicago City Hall are more prosperous than outside. And outside, what do you have outside Chicago? You have monoculture, exactly as the previous speaker explained. The Great Plain, monoculture, pesticides, no biodiversity. So it's been documented that the biodiversity inside the city of Chicago is bigger than outside. Plus, we're talking today about ecosystem services, okay? You think of services like the subway is a service, or electricity is a service, but think of all the service that nature gives us. Clean air, clean water, biodiversity, food, fuel, fiber. I mean, can any one of you could think of living without these services? We've lost this notion of reconnection to nature, but we have not lost the basic necessity of having access to these resources. So, we are in the Anthropocene. We've changed. You are the first generation in 10,000 years to have changed geological era. Did you know that? It's sort of pretty cool, huh? The geologists change their minds about something like every 10,000 years, and now they have declared that we are in the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene means the planet is entirely dominated by humans. So some people will lament that, in particular the hardcore ecologists. They say, oh, where is pristine nature? I grew up professionally in Asia, and for me, nature is always full of people. I've never seen pristine nature in my entire life, and I'm fine with that, I'm fine with people living together with natural and nature depending on humans for management, because this is where we are. We are in the Anthropocene. We've dominated every planetary system. So it means we're in charge. With great power come great responsibilities, right? So now we're responsible for managing all these services. Not just the infrastructure, but also the natural ones. And this is what I find exciting about cities, is that cities gather people, they gather ecosystem services, they gather resources, they gather information, and they also gather government and money, which is useful, and businesses, and innovators of all sorts. Okay. Deconstructing part 2. When you see today green cities, okay, what comes to mind? Vancouver. In France, Nantes is the sort of greenest city. And then, okay, those cities have matured for a long time what it is to be green. But they still think of themselves first, It's still urban gardens for urban people. And then you have greenwashing. Greenwashing is all over the place. And you have two examples here come to mind. One is in Nigeria, Lagos, one of the largest cities in Nigeria, over 10 million people, 80% of them live in slums. This is also the financial capital of Nigeria, which is an oil-producing economy. So what do they do? What are they proposing to do? They're proposing to build an offshore gated community eco-city for business people, where the poor won't have access to the city, of course, because poor are messy and dirty and they pollute. We all know that. Environmental services and poverty do not go hand in hand. And yet, the justice element of managing the planet is a sort of imperative. So this is what I call greenwashing, is throwing a huge amount of concrete in the sea, closing it to other people, reserving it for rich people, and putting solar panels on the roof of buildings so that it can be called a green city. That doesn't work, guys. I mean, an inequitable green city is not going to work because you cannot be an island of prosperity in a sea of misery. Forget that. And this is what we're building, islands of prosperity in the sea of misery, if you look at what we're doing around the world. Plus, the solutions for tomorrow's world may very well be found here. This is a Dharavi slum in India, in Bombay, one of the largest slums in the world. Why are the solutions here, in my view? First of all, because the world already looks like this. The oceans are already a giant garbage bin. Within 10 years or so, in the Mediterranean, there will be more plastic than fish. We're already using our oceans and coastal area as garbage bins. Second, the floods. Yes, I'm not predicting the big flood, but you can see everywhere big floods are coming. The coastal areas are on the front lines of climate vulnerabilities, and we all know that flood and drought succeed each other at more frequent speed right now. So these guys, what do they know? They know how to live in an environment like this, and they still live, you know. It's not, as many urban planners would like to tell us, misery, dejection. Millions of people live like this. And urbanization of tomorrow, 80% of urbanization in the next 25 years will take place in Africa, in unplanned cities, and will be in the form of informal settlements, which take different kind of form and shape, but certainly do not look like Washington, D.C., you know, with a center and nice avenues coming from the center. This is a completely different form of urban planning that's coming. So these people will know how to adapt before we do, and we better take our cues from them, the way they organize, the way they manage to survive in such environments. Okay, let me come to this project. First of all, what do you need when you're at the UN? You're stuck in a huge administration, and innovation is not part of your DNA, okay? Innovation is not part of the DNA of UN organization. Why? Because our shareholders, if you like, are 193 countries, ranging from Vanuatu to the United States, and most of them are rogue countries, you know. That's, you know, the sort of number of countries in that group that are really responsible stewards of their people and their environment is very limited. And I would say it's shrinking. Certainly with the advent of the new administration in the US, we've lost a sort of large shareholder who at least before upheld the principles of the United Nations and today is trampling them, clearly. Is like rejecting them completely. Okay, so what do you do when you want to do this? An innovating project that reconnects people to nature and through nature. First of all, you don't rely on your colleagues, on your bosses. Let me tell you that. You rely on interns, the modern form of indentured servitudes, the interns, free labor, wild spirits, willing to work for free until midnight. This is what you need when you want to innovate. So this is what I did. I got a fantastic group of interns, I think 5 or 6, from one Siberian guy to an American to a Colombian girl. And we had the time of our life, you know, that's also why. And we never did anything dishonest but we certainly were walking on the lines of rules at the UN. I didn't ask my bosses too many permission before starting that. Second of all, what do you need for a successful innovation when you want to create a successful, innovative institution within the UN? Okay, so first you recognize that you're building something on the shoulders of other giants. Okay, so UNESCO, where I was working, had created this worldwide network of biosphere reserves. I think there's 700 of them now. So biosphere reserves are places where there was a revolutionary idea when it came up in the 70s, because ecologists have always been anti-development. You had conservation or development for the longest time. And these guys said, no, there are places where conservation can go in hand with development. So let's say Fontainebleau is a biosphere reserve, Yellowstone is a biosphere reserve, many unlikely places, you know, a biosphere. And this was a progress, certainly a progress in the notion of conservation, in trying to align the conservation and development. Do these places exist in real life? Yes, they do. And the Kristianstad Biosphere Reserve in Sweden is a good example of that. So what did these guys do? You know, Swedes are innovative people. We all know that. In ranking of sustainability, you constantly have the Scandinavians on top of the food chain. Well, I don't exactly have an explanation for that, but this is the way it is. So what these guys, you know, they are surrounded by wetlands. And at first, they did what many cities do. They turned their back to the wetland. Hostile, full of mosquitoes, disgusting. So what did they do? They put their industry there, which created more pollution. And at some point, they said, no, we want to reconnect to the natural system that make up our city and the history of our city. And those are wetlands. So they removed the industrial infrastructure and restored the wetlands. So this was ecological engineering. You understand that when you destroy something and you need to rebuild it, it's no longer, you don't let nature operate by itself. It's ecological engineering. It requires engineers, money, political will. So they did that, and they did that by establishing that the value of healthy wetland is higher than the value, the profit they would get from having industries. And that's a very smart move, and that's called valuation of natural capital. And now you have many economists jumping into this. Okay. The Urbis project built on this Urban Biosphere project, but wanted to go further. And that brings us back to places like Korea, for example, where you have wounds that you need to heal, or pieces that, or peace building means re-establishing trust. You would give me that. Cape Town, the wounds of apartheid. The wounds of apartheid do not disappear just because the apartheid regime disappears. Colored and African people did not have access to Cape Town. They also did not have access to the natural park, the Table Mountain Park that is so charismatic. They were simply excluded from it. So when apartheid collapsed, what happened? When apartheid collapsed, these people had to they were allowed to move again. And what the Cape Town Urbis project did was to try and re-empower people who had no access to Cape Town to become good stewardship of the good stewards of the natural areas by owning them. And that was a long, painful process. But sometimes music, sometimes natural spaces can be places of healing and reconciliation. And in this case, this is what the municipality and the University of Cape Town did within this project. Okay. When you do a project at the UN, you better have a big patron. In this case, it's in the shape of Ban Ki-moon, our Secretary General, because UNESCO was not very friendly to the idea of turning biosphere reserve into urban biosphere. Fear of losing influence. Long story, made short. But Ban Ki-moon was starting to understand the importance of cities, the importance of mayors, who are more nimble in many ways in governance systems. And so we found a friend. We found a friend in Ban Ki-moon, and we also found a friend in the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is an international treaty, but this is also a very important institution. And those guys organized a parallel meeting of mayors, parallel to their conference of the parties, which they do. And they issued a resolution saying, 1, there is valuable nature in cities. 2, cities need to reconnect to rural area to recognize their sort of debt and dependencies. And 3, we should acknowledge and use the level of governance at the municipal level, mayors. So this was groundbreaking in our kind of world, you know, where we work through resolution. Friends again, you know, networks of organizations. And these are all the allies that I had, if you like, including science, Tulane University, Columbia University, Stockholm University, institutions, legal treaties, so semi-NGOs, IUCN, Diversitas, science policy networks, and of course UNESCO, who paid my salary. Not inconsistent. Okay, so in conclusion, I just want to say, don't listen to any politician. Do not vote for any politicians who will tell you that he or she wants to build walls. Walls don't work. They don't work again. They cost money. They are made of concrete. They emit CO2, not good for the environment. They don't stop people. Forget it. They don't stop people. They also don't stop floods. Just look at New Orleans, if you don't believe me. And they cost too much taxpayer money. So hiding ourselves behind wall is not going to do it. So don't listen to these guys. Build bridges through music, through a green line, through music, through a better urban agriculture, but create connections. And thank you so much.